One of the common experiences also is in my dreams, I suddenly was dreaming, and you dream, and it's very common to start doing the Wim Hof breathing in a dream. So you're dreaming about doing that because it's your life. You're doing so much of it, and somehow a lot of us just suddenly have a coincident dream after the weeks or months, and you're doing the breathing. Turns out, if you dream about breathing, you actually do the breathing. There is no separation.
I'm Ashley McFarland, a nonprofit executive living in Duluth, Minnesota, and you are listening to the Vance podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today, we talk with Gerald Caussade. Gerald is an expert at the Wim Hof breathing method. And if you're anything like me, you're like, what do I need to learn how to breathe for? But this experience that we just had together will show you that there is so much to how we think, how we feel, how our bodies heal that are all related to breathing. In fact, in this episode, we actually do a breathing exercise and then talk about how it's changed my feeling and kind of what's going on around me. This is a very weird conversation with a man that has experience in all forms of religious ideas and concepts. This is a very interesting podcast. We're going to get to the interview in just a moment, but first, Mother's Day is right around the corner, and a legacy interview would be an amazing gift to your mother. Oftentimes, if you go to your mom and you say, hey mom, would you like to do a legacy interview? Modesty gets in the way. They'll start saying, oh, I don't know if I have a story to tell, or nobody wants to listen to this. But if instead you present it not just as a gift to her, but really a gift that she is giving to future generations, a way for her to make sure that the family stories that are so important get passed down into future generations, it will change that dynamic, and you will watch your mother be washed over with a level of gratitude because you care so much about her wisdom and the stories that she has to tell. If you're interested in a legacy interview for your mother, go to legacyinterviews.com to find out more. All right, without further ado, let's head to this weird and fun interview with Gerald Caussade. Jerry Caussade, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited. We've talked about this for a while, and now we're here, ready to go.
Yeah, man, this is no joke. We've been talking about this for a year, and finally you said yes. So let's start off by, why should anybody care enough about their breathing that they actually have a method to it?
Yeah, right. We all know how to breathe, and we should care because, to answer specifically, well, I think mental health, everyone is feeling the stress lately, and then physical health. And we're going to talk about the Wim Hof Method, and it changed my life 9 years ago almost now. And I just like talking about it and explaining the things that I learned over this time, the challenges I had in life, and then helping others meet some of those mental health challenges and physical challenges, quite frankly. I mean, it's been mind-blowing. So
like when I know of Wim Hof, he's like some dude that can go out in the cold weather and he has this breathing stuff and he's controlling inflammation. And, I've kind of heard all these things, but I have no concept for what it is or why anybody would take time to like sit down and do a bunch of breathing. Is it like meditation? What is it?
Well, by the way, that's interesting you bring that up because that brings it back to me. When I first started, I'd bring it up and people would be like, what is it? Why should I learn? Right. And look, what is it? He had to explain it himself. Basically, you got to understand, Wim had already learned a lot of yoga over the years, and he was a climber. And so he knew a lot of the basics, but he lost his wife when his oldest son was 11 years old, and he had 4 children, and suddenly he found himself going into the cold, drawn to it, and this breathing just came out of being in the cold. When you get in the cold, you kind of get shocked, he says. And so this breathing technique came out of it. And he had known some yoga things, but a lot of what he brings up and what we'll talk about today is it's something different than yoga and everything. That's why it's taken off. Millions of people are learning now. But 9 years ago, that wasn't the case. People just thought it's some weird thing, honestly. So we're starting this talk about like what it was feeling like 9 years ago when I mentioned it, or the Facebook page I was helped moderate and all that. Everyone was like, yeah, sure, you guys are exaggerating. So why did it take off, and what were some of those, early things that we found out? Well, first of all, yeah, he at that point was just getting some attention, and why I even learned it was that they were starting to notice that, well, he's getting these world records. But the difference between him and anyone else I've ever seen is he was teaching his technique to other people and breaking world records with them. That's insane. You and I go with Wim Hof and go climb Kilimanjaro. He did that. And he broke world records with people, other people that just learned the technique.
What world records was he breaking?
So in that case, he broke a world record in the time to summit Kilimanjaro, from the bottom to the top. And it used to take several days. And frankly, I used to know this number by heart, but they did it basically in a day. Because first of all, I think it's about right near 20,000 feet, right? 19,000, I think, something. And so that is a tall mountain, and you get low on oxygen, right? And the people he brought up there were 65 years old. There was one guy who had cancer. There were, we're not talking about just some big jockey types, right? So that's impressive. And that really blew me away. So he really is very different than others. And that is that he created this technique that other people could do rapidly. And so, your audience, people listening here can say, well, you can use it. You don't have to be some super being. And you will see, I saw a total life transforming effects within 90 days. That's
within
crazy.
90 days.
Within 90 days.
What is it? It's you're teaching people how to sit and breathe. What?
So there's three things that are important on the Wim Hof method. One is breathwork, the breathing. He's combined it with cold exposure, and then the third pillar is commitment. So the final pillar is mental focus. I mean, you need to commit to this because these are two very intense things. So right at the beginning, and there are all kinds of free resources on at their website and all that help you with that too. Frankly, because if you start the pattern, and every day you do a little bit, you'll find some improvement. So, to answer your question, those three things, and then now a little more detail is the breathing. There's a lot of other techniques that have been around forever, right? There's all yoga. There's all these yogic breathing has been around, obviously, for thousands of years. Sufism, the path of Rumi, uses it. I coincidentally, even for, I had been another 6 years prior to that I took up certain Sufi practices. And one of the techniques there was almost identical to the Wim Hof breathing. The Sufi breathing I had learned was taught one-on-one because it's considered very intense. And then, but they combine it with fasting, which is a lot of spiritual practices did fasting. I had never seen anything, even to this day, that takes it instead with fasting specifically, but takes it with cold. So Wim Hof has, to answer your question again, is what's unique here is this breathing technique and combining it with cold. And the interesting science that came out years back already and now continues to come out is that the breathing technique, which I thought we will do a little bit of it today to introduce people to it and then point people where they could learn more, is that they can do the breathing technique and it takes you to a super hypoxic state, which means very low oxygen. And we're talking levels of oxygen, for some people, it goes down to 50%, which is crazy. When you talk to doctors and others, they did not think that was possible just through breathing techniques. I mean, this is even 9 years ago. And so it continues to blow people away. Now, they had to change the physiology textbooks on this because you thought people would just pass out. So you're going to super hypoxic states, hypoxia meaning low oxygen, and you're getting used to working at that level. And what that does is releases a huge amount of a chemical called adrenaline or noradrenaline. And then you also do the same thing. Coincidentally, it turns out when you get into cold, you actually also have some of the same effect, a huge boost of adrenaline. So if you do just the breathing technique, yes, you get the benefit. If you do just cold exposure, He didn't invent that. Norwegians do it. All around the world they've been doing that. But the combination has been quite unique. And the science is showing that when you combine them, then you get this double whammy effect of this boosting of noradrenaline and all that. And looking for it, we'll go over some of the science and some of the changes we would see people talking about that seemed honestly quite magical. So when I started, for example, I started because, here I'd been meditating for decades and doing all these different things. And at age 49, suddenly really starting to get arthritis in my hip. And I still had asthma that I'd had as a grown-up, adult onset asthma, ironically triggered by cold. One of the things that triggered it was cold. And they were significant enough that I was limping at age 49. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm feeling old. I mean, we all get to that point, right? And suddenly, this guy is hitting the news a bit. And I'm like, well, there's so much junk. Now, being married at the time to a psychiatrist who was trained, and interestingly enough, here in St. Louis, and her expertise was sports psychiatry, psychiatrist of the Cardinals. And the funny thing is she thought, oh, that's cute. Hubby, you go do that because it's all placebo anyway, probably, because again, this is 9 years ago. However, what's interesting to me is that when I learned meditation 40-something years ago, they said the same thing about meditation. And her generation now, it's like, oh, no, all the science is showing that meditation really makes all these changes, and we know that. So we know now that the Wim Hof Method, with some of the early research, that there's major changes in the brain, there's major changes in the physiology, which I'd love to go over. But, well, let's get back to we'll go over that. But again, going back to what the technique does and all that. So we've got the cold exposure and we have the breathing, both causing a huge amount of adrenaline. And basically what he's teaching you is to stay relaxed in a very stressful state. Do you do the cold exposure yourself at all? I think you probably.
Yeah, you and I talked about this a little bit. So I've done cold showers, and I don't do the ice bath just as like a function of I don't have a bath to do them in. But like, to me, it was something to be endured. It was the first time I ever talked to you where you were like, you don't have to do the cold exposure as just like dumping the coldest water you can find on yourself. So I do it not nearly as frequently as I used to. I did like a month where I did it, and then I like kept up with it for a while, and then eventually you're like, I don't really want to have a bunch of cold water on me.
Right. And I think that, and that is something we learned also in the last 9 years. So fast forward, one of the messages to get out now is that people would even have videos of themselves screaming, getting in the water, like, oh my God, and it's completely unnecessary. In fact,
But let's first talk about, why do people do cold exposure? What is it? I mean, like, let's start from zero.
Okay. Well, again, so going back to the why, he was able to break world records. So we said health. So what are some of the benefits? Well, first of all, so I personally noticed that within those 90 days, I was off all my asthma medication, didn't need it anymore. My hip I didn't feel that anything was just back to normal. And then I'm going on this Facebook page and we're all talking, and there's only 2,000 people on it. And it just kept growing and growing. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence now starting to appear. And I became the main moderator basically because of my connection with so many doctors. My wife, and then her brother, my brother-in-law, is a cardiologist. And then Jim Ironman is a transpersonal psychiatrist. So there was more the mystical side of it. And he was into breath work for 30 plus years, taught me original holotropic breathing. So there's all these science just working with me, and medicine basically. And they're saying, well, this is interesting because Wim is saying things that are breaking the rules. Like, for example, in yoga, you're not supposed to breathe too hard, too heavy. You don't want to overdo it. And Wim's like, no, just really go all out. And we're going super hypoxic. And then cold, Ayurveda, some of the TCM, Chinese medicine, like, you don't want to get too cold. That's bad for you. It's bad for the kidneys. It's bad for... So frankly, there's a lot of... He was getting hit from the science, saying that not possible. And even you would think that the traditional woo-woo people would be behind it. They're saying, no, this is wrong. Both sides, fast forward 9 years, being respected by both sides much more now. So what are some of the benefits? Well, one is that what we're finding out is over the last 9 years, is why did I get this? Why did I suddenly feel better? Well, first of all, the breathing releases a huge amount of adrenaline and noradrenaline, and that's massively anti-inflammatory. The cold exposure is also massively anti-inflammatory. There is a mental portion to all of this, there's no doubt, which is that your listeners are going to be like me. I hated the cold. I mean, okay, maybe there's somebody who likes cold. They're rare. I mean, I define myself as somebody who liked heat. And when I put my hand in cold water, you might as well, literally, it's like going into a fire. It hurts. It's painful. For me to now tell people that I get into an ice bath and it's effortless and I literally relax, that's just mind-blowing. There's very few things in life that really change your definition of
Yeah,
yourself.
and for people that like are sitting there thinking like, no, I can do that. Just imagine getting in your shower. It's a warm shower. Now just turn it to cold. Just like now the water is hitting you, or you don't even let the shower heat up and you just step into it, right? You have that jerk back reaction or that like
Oh,
reaction.
It's shocking. Imagine even just, and then a full-blown ice bath at near freezing. Yeah, it would be, and yet everyone can do this. There's no genetic, now there are some contraindications I guess we should mention. The contraindication is that if you do have, if you're pregnant, you shouldn't do the breathing technique and you should not be doing the cold exposure unless you already were beforehand, because it creates more stress in your body. You're having a baby, probably.
Okay, so if you have to be careful, be careful. But now let's talk about like somebody gets into that bath.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, so again, first you want to do the breathing technique. We call it a few rounds of breathing. That will, the breathing technique will release the adrenaline. Now you've got some adrenaline already. You're prepped for going into the shower. But when you get into the shower, instead of just the shock, yes, you can just take it to the slightly as cold as you can take it. And now, deep, steady breathing. So not the Wim Hof breathing, which we'll show later, is kind of this fast breathing, but no, steady, relax. You want to be relaxed. I like to say make love to the shower. I really have that intense, just that attitude of just, because it's so foreign to us, like, just, oh, I love you. You know what I mean? Just totally be into it.
No, I don't know what you mean. Like,
well, again, that's the mystic in me, is make love to the universe even. But it starts with the shower, right? So if you can love the shower, you can love anything. If you can love a cold shower about to kill you, that's what you feel like, then you can pretty much love everything, right? So you now take it as cold as you can, but you don't want to do, like you said, that jumping in. So if you do that day after day, you will notice that you can do it colder and colder and colder. All right. And then relax. So if you're feeling yourself doing this, then you probably overdone it a little bit. Breathe and you relax. So what you're teaching yourself now is, oh, this is a stressful experience, right? And I'm relaxing. When you're doing the breathing technique, the hypoxia is theoretically stressful. There's adrenaline being released, which is our brains and our bodies are used to. That happens only under a major event, scary event, stressful event. The Wim Hof Method is retraining us, unlike yoga and other things, is actually retraining us completely to say, you know what, we can be relaxed even when there's a huge amount of adrenaline in our body. So that's the summary, is what science is finding out is that both of these techniques combined do this faster than anything they've ever seen, which is that you are learning, you're re-educating your system. And by the way, there's two things that are happening. Vagal tone, that vagus nerve, you're increasing vagal tone with this technique, and you're reducing inflammation. So those are the two things I would want your listeners to understand and follow, is that I think when you're looking at all the research, all the things in life that increase vagal tone, that's good, and things that are reducing inflammation, that's good. And this is one of those things that really does both.
So I'm hesitant to do this, but I'm so curious when you say like doing the breathing method, the
So
method.
you're just
like,
dying to go. Yeah.
I'm a little reluctant to do it. Like I
Have you ever
remember
done them? Tried the breathing? Or
no,
not?
huh?
Oh,
And I
okay.
remember when I first started doing meditation,
Yeah.
I remember being like, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do it because I don't know, like I was afraid of the loneliness of meditation. And now I like totally understand it and I'm like do it all the time. But like this, I feel the same sensation about doing this breathing thing where I'm like, I don't want to touch it. In fact, when we were talking about the Wim Hof method, I was like, I almost was like, all right, you can come on, but like we're not going to do the Wim Hof method, right? But now that we're here, let's see it. How does it work? Can you walk me through it?
Sure. So we won't do 3 rounds. It takes a while on it, but we'll do one round, one set. And what happens is you start with 30 breaths, deep breaths. Then you do what's called an exhale retention. That means it's easier than talking about it. We do 30 breaths. We let all the air out. We hold our breath as long as we can. And then at the end of that, you inhale for about 12 seconds. Just take a deep breath, fill up, and hold your breath for 12, 15 seconds. And then you do another round. Now, each time you do this, you follow up and generally you start out with 3 rounds, okay? It's as simple as that. Now, this is a cousin to something called holotropic breathing, which is basically deep breathing. Has been around for decades, invented by Stan Grof and Christina Grof. And it is known, if you do tons of this, to create total psychedelic effects without having to do psychedelics. It's pretty cool. So Wim Hof likes to say, get high on your own supply. And we'll talk about the science, but the science surprised us that he was more right than we thought. So because there's more than adrenaline being released. So let's go over it. So let's just do it. So we're only going to do 30. So we do, and this is how the breathing works basically. So you just take, it's diaphragmatic breathing. You start here and then you start with so you can even put your hand here and then you take a breath in here. And then, so start there and then fill up the chest. So, and it's full. So this fills up and this fills up and you almost feel your chest right? And then I like to say, let the gravity do the work. We don't push the air out. We just let it out. So you're not squeezing it out. You're just letting it out effortlessly. That's one. We just do that 30 times. So, and then let it out. And again. But we can speed that up a little. It helps to have someone else count. Okay, we'll do 10 more. Five more. One more. Let it out. And then just hold the breath. And just let your body relax. Now follow your lead. When you feel the need to breathe, just take a deep breath in. And then hold. And then exhale. And then you would immediately follow up now again. Now, each time you do that, you are lowering your oxygen levels more and more and more. Because why? We're purging carbon dioxide. It is carbon dioxide that makes us need to breathe. That will so really we do have to bring this out. This breathing technique and other is ancient in a sense, and can be dangerous. We've had people not follow the rules. You never do this driving. You never do this in water. People have passed out and died in water. So again, never do this breathing in water. If once you do one over and over again, you can hold your breath so long that you could accidentally faint.
This is as calming as many minutes of meditation. Like my arms and legs feel totally at peace, like almost heavy, but not heavy. Like just they're in a relaxed place. And when I do meditation, sometimes after 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you come out and you're not tired, but you're just kind of like, I don't have the same tension that makes me feel like I need to be in motion. And that's what I feel like right now. I have no need to be in motion.
Well, I've always said you're already a very deep person, so these things will have a deep effect on you. But
This is cool, Jerry.
Yeah, the mystical side of this is you change your breath. Changing the breath automatically changes our state of consciousness, right? That's one round. So we do 3 rounds, and by the end there, you didn't get the first round. You did not get that adrenaline release at all. Okay, so you're getting the calming effect, but the adrenaline release, you'll even feel some twitching and all that. But it's strange. It's a calm and adrenaline. And like if I have a stuffy nose or something, I'm also allergic to cats. I'm around cats or whatever. I have one. So by the 3rd round, I do it suddenly, boom, everything clears up. So I don't need an inhaler. Who needs an inhaler when? And this is a neat thing to know. People know people want inhalers or whatever stress. By the 3rd round, if you don't have your inhaler, whatever, do it, and boom, you have a natural way, and the adrenaline's released and clears up and clears everything up.
So how often are you engaging in this Wim Hof breathing method?
So really, optimally, once a day. When you want to, so you don't, again, let's just remind people. So you don't do it in water. You don't do it driving. You might think you're not going to pass out, and you won't for like a year, and then lo and behold, something's changing your physiology and you pass out. It's happened to people. Like, damn, I just want you to know. We've had people post car accidents. I know I shouldn't, but I got to warn everybody else. I was doing this while driving. You know, you'd be crazy because I know it's tempting.
I mean, it is tempting. If you had told me this 2.5 minutes ago,
I know,
I'd have been like, what do you mean? But it's so relaxing.
Yeah.
Like, not quite like a sedative relaxing, not like I'm not able to do these things. I just don't want to.
Right. So now, same thing. You don't think cold exposure is relaxing, but as you get used to it, that you get out of it and you sleep better, and there's this high from it. But then it's so relaxing. You're just so mellow after a deep cold exposure. It's ridiculous. So this is not the mellow me. I mean, I have, because I'm in a temporary home and all that, I also don't have an ice bath set up. So I'm in a temporary place. So I rely on cold showers at the gym and home. And the last weeks have not been cold. So I've been out of cold exposure for several weeks. And those of us who do Wim Hof also over time add sauna. So one of the things we'll talk about is you can actually do heat, cold. So we'll bring that up. But so that the Wim Hof method naturally brings in some other things too to help out with it. And a lot of your listeners probably are into sauna and heat, and you can add this to the routine. You can go hot, but you always want to end cold. So that's one rule. End cold. Do it. You can go back and forth, but end cold.
So how does this become like a part of a practice? Is this like the way meditation is? Like, oh, I just do this as my morning routine, or how does it work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you want to do this right, let's say you're going to start now again. First of all, I would highly recommend one big tip that's not out there a lot is get your baseline on your resting heart rate. Luckily, I did that. My resting heart rate was 72, which I was a little disappointed. I was 49. I thought I was in better shape than that, but it was 72. How to take that, of course, is right when you wake up in the morning. I mean, it's not just sit down. You have to like even sit for a few minutes and all that. People can look that up, but you take your resting heart rate. My resting heart rate dropped from 72. By the end of the 10-week course, it was about 54, 55.
Whoa.
Shocking. That was the first time my wife and her brother were like, interesting. You can't make that up. That's shocking. Oh, that shocked me. And then I repeated cold exposure. I was only doing ice baths once a week. There are many people who like to do it daily. I would recommend trying to do deep cold exposure like that once a week at least, and you get a lot of benefit. And then when you do that, my heart rate dropped to about 44, 45, resting heart rate. And when I would go see my doctor, I would say pediatrician, got too many kids, doctor, what do they call them? Just whatever.
Just a doctor.
Yeah, your doctor, your general practitioner, that's right. They're like, oh, you're an athlete. I'm like, trust me, I do work out, but like 40 minutes at a time, a few times a week, yada, yada. I don't run 6 miles. I run like a few miles here and there. No, you're an athlete. Okay, fine. Now they kind of read about this, but this is the thing. So I track that. Now, why is this important? So one of the other effects is it sounds crazy and too good to be true, but those of us that do this technique, we just don't get sick anymore. Now, I mean, so one way to know that you're about to get sick is that you track your heart rate, your resting heart rate every morning, and I'll notice that, strange, my resting heart rate in the morning is up. So 2 rules. When you feel like, whether you feel it or not, one of the rules is skip cold exposure, because that's a stressor actually. No more cold exposure. And now do extra breath work. Now that's a pain in the butt because it takes time and no one seems to ever have time. But if you want to, you have to do the work. So instead of 3 rounds, which takes about 10, 15 minutes of your day to do the 3 rounds properly and all that, that day you might be getting sick. So now you want to do it a few more times, maybe another set, maybe even twice that day, a bunch of breathing. It's crazy, but it resets your system. Again, we'll go over some of the science, but one of the studies, the endotoxin study that came out about 9 years ago, 8-9 years ago, showed that this breathing and cold exposure boosts the immune system tremendously. So there's science behind it. And so now you're feeling a little under the weather. And so you do this and you avoid getting sick. And so the trick is, again, quit cold exposure, do that. And then in a day or 2, you might feel better. You'll even see your resting heart rate getting better and you avoid it. But frankly, then over the years, you just don't even get sick. I mean, just keep doing the breathing.
When you're first starting this, right, one of the challenges of meditation is people are like, what am I supposed to think about? And you're like, oh, you think about nothing. Well, you don't have any concept for what does think about nothing even mean.
Right.
What do you tell people about what they should be thinking about? Is it just sitting there counting your breaths? Is it focusing on something else?
Yeah. You're going to deeper topics. Well, first of all, I don't think of the Wim Hof method as replacing meditation or any other. It's a beautiful adjunct to all these other techniques.
Okay.
It's an adjunct, does not replace. So it was I've done various forms of meditation. I learned TM and TM Cities program when I was 16 and 19. But then later I did add mindfulness and Tonglen and Sufi techniques. So Tonglen is compassion, a type of compassion meditation. So those things got me to a certain extent, but somehow the Wim Hof method took me deeper. It gets rid of that deep layer of stress that we have, and we have more than ever. And it allowed you do the Wim Hof method, and you'll find that, I suspect you do mindfulness or something like that, suddenly it seems just to work better. It was a struggle. It wasn't, in mindfulness, suddenly you're like, yeah, I'm not really feeling so peaceful or anything. And then suddenly you do this and you follow up. So you do your breathing and then you do your meditation. You're naturally in the state of silence. You're like, oh, that's what mindfulness is.
Man, it would be nuts to meditate after doing that breathing for 3 times. It's funny to be excited for something that calms you down.
Right.
But
right. No, it's true. Yeah, that's right. And by the way, I really believe I have very close friends that, for example, are, very religious. I mean, I'm here in the Midwest. I have friends of all political persuasions and even it deepens your faith. I know it sounds interesting, but it's like, because so much of our faith relies on us just feeling well. Well, we can be better with it. Increased vagal tone makes you more loving. It puts you in touch with other people. You're more aware of how they're feeling. And
let's talk about this vagal tone. What is that?
So we do the breathing technique. We're doing the cold exposure, and we notice this, and there's science behind this, that there's our primary, right? We've got the spinal cord with all everything, but the vagus nerve is the exception. It's separate. So people even who break, vertebrae or break their back, they still have the vagus nerve.
I don't know anything at all about this.
Yeah. So that's a whole probably podcast in itself. You have to. You got to look up, and you'll be like, oh my God, there's all this science about vagus nerve, and so the vagal tone is increasing the vagal tone suddenly means basically that you're more in touch with your gut in vagal tone. So it's now more communication, which is interesting because we now also know that eating properly and all that, right? It has that effect. So when you do the Wim Hof method over time, one of the subjective experiences is that you feel more in touch with your gut and nature through your gut. It's a very hard thing to explain. And people who aren't mystical still are, they're like, I sound like some kind of mystic, but it's strange. I feel like I'm in touch with nature and the trees and the people around me. And it's just from the breathing and the cold exposure. You don't have to believe anything. Wim is not, he doesn't even define himself as a mystic at all. He's like, just do it. He's very practical. So, but the experience is one that is described in so many traditions. So if love is your path, this is a great thing too, because you just naturally just fall in love with things, So vagal tone. So the vagal tone increases. Many of us who do the Wim Hof method also, we found that you're doing the breathing technique, and when you're doing cold exposure and the breathing technique, you naturally seem to not want to eat as much. And what does that lead into automatically?
In better health.
Yeah, but intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
And that kind of took off years back too. Around the 9 years, it's been building up. You're hearing everything about intermittent fasting. And so this is what's interesting. So suddenly I learned the Wim Hof method, but then within months, I'm like, well, I don't feel like I have to eat it. And so I naturally started doing intermittent fasting.
What is your fasting regimen?
I don't like to do anything to the extreme. So I intermittent fast 4 or 5 days a week. And then I have 2 cheat days where I just do whatever. I'm not sure that's the best thing. You probably should do it 7 days a week. But anyway, I'm at my point. Doesn't mean it's right for everyone. But I intermittent fast about 20 hours. So that means I really don't eat anything for 20 hours.
Yeah, it's been funny. So Ben Anderson, who we both know, he's executive producer of the show.
Right.
He would always be around here and he wouldn't eat lunch. And it was just weird for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was my time to do lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided one day that for some reason I needed to do it. I just didn't have time to eat or something. And once you get over the experience of like, oh, I need to eat at this time, I realized by not eating for the whole day, I don't have that like crash of being tired.
That's
It used
exactly
to be I would come in here around 1 o'clock
right.
and I would lay down on this
Right.
couch and take a nap.
I know, it's weird.
Like I'd eat and then there'd be about an hour, hour and a half,
Totally,
and then I'd lay
right?
down. That's all gone.
It's all gone.
And once you are comfortable with the feeling of being a little bit hungry, you realize it's not even the feeling of hunger. It's oftentimes the feeling of boredom. So like I used to eat because it was like time to do it.
Right.
And like we have a guy in the office today and I was like, "Oh wait, you eat lunch, don't you?" Like,
Right.
"Oh, we need to make special accommodation for this because like once it's out of your system, you don't do it." And on the weekends when I have pancakes with my daughters in the morning, I have to fight all day because I'm so much more tired than I am if I don't eat.
It's true, right? I know. The cheat days, I have to admit that I really question it. But the problem is just being with other people sometimes.
Yeah, if I'm making pancakes with my daughters, I want to eat pancakes with my daughters.
That's the truth. Yeah. So so basically, it's you got it. But and you do want to do long enough, and I noticed the same thing. I think that's the universal experience: is that the ups and downs go away, and it's because, of course, that sugar rushes and you're not getting all that ups and downs, right, from all the
And you finally have a way to monitor something that's been happening in your life that you just didn't even realize. Like I never made the connection between I eat lunch and then an hour later I'm tired and need to go take a nap. It just never dawned on me. And then once you stop doing it, all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, there's all this stuff with food and the way that I operate that I just never realized before. I used to make the joke that intermittent fasting was just a fancy way to describe skipping breakfast, but it's not.
Not at all.
It's a lot more than that.
It is, and that's so. What improved my health? I'm not, I have to give credit to a few things, right? So I'm doing cold exposure. So now you're doing cold exposure. You're doing your breathing. Here suddenly, fast forward 1 year. I am in the best physical at age 50. I hit 50, best physical shape of my life and best mental shape of my life. So some of it's probably from intermittent fasting, which is a result also of but also I wasn't getting sore working out. Like I'm one of those people, at least I would work out and day 2 was worse than day 1. Like by day 2, I was so bad, I could barely go back to the gym. And then I'm like, I got other things to do or whatever, So the Wim Hof method and I would do cold showers every day, actually, so at the gym, whatever, as cold as possible. And then I found I could do the gym pretty much 7 days a week, but I do 5 days a week, So I was doing more workouts. So suddenly here I am getting more toned. And the adrenaline and everything really helps. I mean, I have ADD, just in my style of speaking, all that. But I've never been medicated. That was one thing of being married to a psychiatrist. I was like, you're right on the edge. Maybe you could use some, but a meditation. And then this technique really helped. But I noticed the difference. If I haven't been doing some cold exposure now, I'll not be as focused, or I can't come up with a concept as quickly or a word. But think about this. How many of your friends were, everyone's trying to get younger and all that. But I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life in my 50s. I'm 57 now, and it's just getting better. I swear, it keeps getting better. That's in a message that needs to get out. Now, what we noticed over the years is that people were saying some awfully miraculous things about the Wim Hof method. So I'm going to hear some of the things people are experiencing, and then the science behind why that might be happening. A lot of it is still anecdotal, but there's some really amazing stuff, and it's all on the internet. They can find it. So one of the things was, I mentioned this this study, and that they injected the people with it was students and Wim Hof with a bacterium, and it was a dead bacteria. It was E. coli, by the way, dead E. coli. So the real E. coli would have made you super sick, but dead E. coli will make you sick, but won't continue to do the damage, right? So the control group, I feel bad for these college students because this is literally, they signed up and got paid, but they got E. coli and they were diarrhea and sick and everything, right? The Wim Hof group, no one got sick. Wim himself, okay, he's the master of this. He's been doing it decades. He's like, I felt a little headache for a moment. But even the others were like, no, they felt something, but now they had done only about a few weeks of cold exposure. They had done some cold exposure, but they were mostly doing this breathing technique. And what they found is that the breathing technique, that adrenaline boost, activated the immune system. Now, it's more complicated. A lot of times you'll hear Wim and others say it boosts your immune system. But it's cooler than that, actually. I think you'll love this. What's so cool about it is it doesn't actually boost the immune system. That can be bad sometimes. Sometimes you want less inflammation, you want less of it actually boosts the part, I had this memorized before. It's been years, I don't use this term, but there's actually a part of the immune system that's aware to check on the particular T cells, B cells, there's so many, right? That actually check to see how much of a immune response you should have. So it boosts the part of the immune system saying, what should I be doing? Should I have more or less? And quite frequently, nowadays, we need less inflammation. So it's that it boosts the part of the immune system saying, what should I do? And generally, what happens is we have lower inflammation. And that's beautiful. Now we know, fast forward 9 years, everything's about lowering inflammation, lower inflammation. So if you lower inflammation, what happens? Well, suddenly, what's connected to inflammation? Arthritis. All kinds of skin disorders. It turns out depression, anxiety is related to inflammation. Antidepressants, if you talk to psychiatrists, some of the best antidepressants were actually also anti-inflammatory. And so they are also anti-inflammatory. So it turns out lowering inflammation helps with that. So we started getting a lot of people joining the page and finding out that their anxiety or depression, so you have the anxiety spectrum, can be just low-grade anxiety all the way to full-blown OCD, which is on that spectrum. Same thing with depression, could be mild dysthymia, bit, all the way to full-blown deep depression, some of them were on. And what's really cool is on there, I would basically, it was a great time to be alive and for me to help because, working with doctors, I could work vicariously through them and help people by helping them. This was the first time I was just giving part of my day, and it was about 4 or 5 hours of my day, to helping people and telling them, okay, it sounds like what's working, for example, is, we talk about the cold exposure. Well, actually, if you're depressed, you need to do it every day. And it turns out, this was anecdotal, found out that people taking it down to near freezing was helping them more. And they were even able to get off their medication or lower their antidepressants and other things.
So let's talk about cold exposure. When somebody is doing that cold shower or a cold bath, how much time should they do this for? Are you just popping in and popping out? Like what goes on? Should you have a mental image of what you're thinking about? How should you proceed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so we went over some of the basics of the breathing. So to prepare for the cold, you do want a mental attitude. It's amazing, right? So the attitude is surrender. So we're not used to surrendering. I say making love to the shower or the cold, but really surrendering, let go. We're so used to fighting. No, let go. So first of all, say, hey, remember, I'm doing the cold, whatever I'm going to do, just relax, surrender, go cold. Let's say you've already done your course and now you're doing your daily cold. So you get in, and the key thing to do, several techniques are important. One is deep, slow breathing. So another form of breathing. Deep, slow breathing. And when we want to learn what's called non-shivering thermogenesis. And there's a lot of confusion on the internet now about this because this has all become very popular. But the best form is non-shivering thermogenesis. We have something called brown fat and beige fat. You might have heard about that. Children have a lot of it, but we lose it over time. But it turns out the science shows that you can rebuild it. It's probably beige fat, and those of us that do that cold exposure over time, you're getting more and more. Now, the benefit is that you're automatically, by the way, burning calories the whole day as you have that. And so you will lose a little weight, lose a little bit of weight. When we're in the cold, you're staying in the cold. Now, it's very easy at the beginning to overdo it. We've had people go into hypothermia accidentally. Rare, but you really, again, when you're doing this, you're pushing it. You can be really macho. The more macho you are, the more you're going to injure yourself. You start shivering and you're like, oh, I'm not shivering anymore. Well, that's maybe bad. You've now pushed your past into full hypothermia. Because when you're even in the dangerous stages of hypothermia, you start getting loopy, you don't even notice it, and you're in danger. So non-shivering thermogenesis is you stay relaxed and you listen to your body, and you'll notice that if you're in there too long, you'll start shaking. And as soon as you start shaking, you've lost control and you get out. That's it. It's as simple as that. So you get out. And you do this each time you go in. And what you'll find out is as long as you use, okay, now the mental side of it. You're deep breathing. What are you thinking about? You're into, what do I think while I'm in there? Well, happy thoughts, but actually you can start visualizing heat. So some of us do some of that more Eastern concepts of Tummo and all that. You can start even breathing in fire or feeling fire or thinking fire, heat. And it feels like you're faking it at the beginning. Okay, I feel fire. There's no fire going on. I'm freezing. I'm in the cold. But weeks go by, months go by, and you're like, I swear I'm feeling warmth. And it's real because now you've got more brown fat and you're automatically warming up. So when I go outside in the middle of the winter in a t-shirt and it's 15 degrees outside, that's where I told you I hated the cold. That's my favorite temperature now because now thermogenesis starts automatically. I don't think about it. And what happens when thermogenesis starts? I relax. So the old me was freaking out and I would be the standard person trying to bundle up. But those of us doing the Wim Hof Method over time, now the new us relax in the cold automatically. This
sounds like simply amazing. I mean, like the idea of going outside and not shivering or not being brutalized by the cold, seems like a dream state almost.
It is sane, and you feel like you're in the Matrix. Because when I park my car and I'm walking inside and people look at you like you're nuts, of course. And again, I'm no Wim Hof. So remember, Wim Hof, on the other hand, I'm just a normal guy, but Wim Hof, using these techniques, so he has world records. So one of the world records he had back then, that was one of them that got attention, is I think it hit minus 40. I think it hit minus 20, maybe at one point minus 40. It was at least minus 20 Fahrenheit. He did a full marathon, but he was barefoot and he just had shorts. And it's so hilarious. There's videos on it. And the crews that are following him and the cameras are, of course, in parkas and all that stuff. But he does this, and it's nighttime and the sun comes up. So it wasn't like there's a... And he even injured his foot a bit. And he got that cold and that frozen. But he made it, and that was one of the world records he did. So he also has it's underwater. Again, we don't do our techniques underwater, but so he still to this day maintains some of those. And he doesn't feel the need to continue to break world records. It is still tough on your body. But you can, and plenty have now taken this technique and decided to push the limits and break more world records, by the way, using the techniques. I'm just a normal Joe. When it's 15 degrees outside or whatever, I know if you want to and you want to push this and continue to do more exposure, you could be outside for hours or whatever. Frankly, if it's 15 outside, it's effortless for 20 minutes. After that, no, it's not. But that's still shocking to me.
And how long of somebody going into this practice do they have to have a commitment before they're able to do these feats of strength?
I know. It sounds, again, that's what's so cool, Vance. No pun intended. So, but what's so cool about it is, truthfully, how many things in life really do we define ourselves like, I hate cold, and that you can, if you change that, if you can change this, that I am telling you, so it's 10 weeks, the 10-week course. They've got a 10-week course. They've got a mini course. They have for a paid course. It's a few $100. That's nothing to change your life. I sound like I don't get a commission, but it's mind-boggling. Oh yeah. So thousands of people. I've helped thousands of people on that page. So we grew from 2 to 180,000 people on that page. And we talked, one of the things we talked about was, okay, so Nicole, let's get back to that topic. So we get out, right? Now let's talk about post-cold. That's actually the next step. So do some breath work. We don't do the breathing in the Wim Hof breathing style in the water. When we get in the water, cold shower or the ice bath, deep, slow breathing. We can visualize heat if we wish or something. When we get out, now there's new instruction. How do we warm up? It's easy to get something called afterdrop, the concept of afterdrop. So what happens when we're in deep cold or cold exposure is that the body naturally starts shunting the blood flow and moving it only to your core. And so there's less blood flow to your hands and extremities. When you get out, and it's often you can overdo it a little bit, then what you find is that you could start shaking pretty uncontrollably. That happens, and that's called afterdrop, and we want to avoid afterdrop, but it often happens. So to avoid it, Wim came up with this technique, and it's the Wim. There's a horse stance that we know. A lot of us have heard of horse stance from. You never heard of it? Yeah, from karate. I did taekwondo as a kid and all that. So it's a deep. You can look it up, but it's a deep squat. You're standing and squatting, and it's almost like this, but standing and a deep squat, and you're engaging your glutes and some big muscles here. But you're not doing cardio. That's the key. Because you're warming up and you're now slowly mixing the blood from your internal blood with that cold external blood. That's important because if you do it too quickly, actually it's a huge stress on the cardiovascular system, and some people could even get arrhythmias and other things. So you don't just jump out of the cold and some people are like, oh, you can run. No, please don't run. The proper training that the Wim Hof instructors teach is that you actually want to do this deep squat, and then he does this arm movement like this. He goes, and he does this. So it's like this. Now, I, being more of a karate person in the past, I kind of like to do this, but they do this like, and then with some noise, and he goes like, hoo, ha, hoo. And so it's like really just getting everything going. Oh, sounds crazy. He loves having fun with this, right? What increases vagal tone as well? Humming. So that's a doctors. A lot of doctors know this thing too. So if you start going, all that stuff, and that also increases vagal tone.
That's
so
fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes me think my daughter actually is really into humming, and in fact, she will be like singing a song, and she'll be like, "No, Dad, I want to hum." And so we hum, and I have actually not hummed in, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And now we spend a lot of time humming. I wonder if that's like a natural pull towards something.
That's a self-soothing thing that she realized.
Yeah.
That's actually brilliant. That's really cool. Yeah, kids are amazing.
Well, you and I have talked about kids quite a bit. In fact, the first time we met, I was telling you about how my experience of trying to describe smells to my daughter before she had smelled them. And in particular, we talked, and this was more than a year ago, about the Korean spice viburnum. And then just a few days ago, we had a meetup, and the viburnums were in bloom, and I brought you one of them. Could you describe as best you can what that smell was?
Yeah, it is as magical as you thought. I've grown up with smells. So my family's in the herb business and essential oils, and I'm European as well as American. So all that's been big. So I've always been into smells and natural, right, as natural as possible. So you mentioned that, I believed you, but you blew me away because I've grown up. Lived in Costa Rica for a while, so I've had gardenias and then jasmine and all that. And that's actually what's interesting. So to me...
Because how did I describe it? Do you remember?
I don't really... Well, maybe did you throw jasmine in there?
Well,
or
I had
gardenia?
just...
Jasmine, I think you say jasmine with pepper or, spice.
I describe it to people without using the words as like, this is one of the most amazing smells in the entire world. Like, I would
Right.
submit that there are very few things that you'd be like, no, it's not as good as X, because it is right up there with it. It is complex and beautiful. But how would you describe it?
So to me, it's a very spiritual flower because for me, all these techniques have brought up a lot of synesthesia to me naturally. So smells bring up a lot of complexity in me. So to me, it smells like jasmine with gardenia and then with a pepper. And I mean, so it ends. It's like a fine wine or a bourbon or all these other fine things. I love a nice smooth ending or something. But this has a kick at the end. To me, what's amazing about that is when you say that is that for me personally, all these different non-dual spiritual practices that I'm involved in, they actually go to the same place. But to me, they all have a different smell to them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Some is rose, one is jasmine, one is, so that's interesting. Yeah. And so for you to bring this, what you consider this greatest smell, what I thought was fascinating and beautiful was that it, I love the idea of Rumi right, that love, he brings all religions. He says, love is my religion. Yes, he's definitely Muslim and he continued to practice his faith, but he included that faith. It's like Ken Wilber would say. So he said, realistically, all religions are truly love. Love is my religion. So having said that, though, I appreciate, my friends that love Jesus. That's got but that also has a smell to it almost. And those that love other paths. What connects them all to me and why I can partake in every one of them is every one of them's like, maybe you're deluded because you believe in that other stuff, but you're real about the love. And so that flower brings them all together. That's what I love about that flower.
Oh, that is really an amazing thing. I had a guy named John Lanius on the podcast, and he does all these incense journeys. In fact, we're going to do one this weekend here in the studio.
Yeah, I'll be there.
And, oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great. And so he's the one that pointed something out to me about smells that's so amazing, is that you really can't imagine a smell. Like, or if you can only grab it for a second. Like if I say, well, what's the smell of a lemon? You really you can be like, it's like a citrusy thing, right? Like you can grab it, but not completely. And that Korean spice viburnum, it only blooms. It blooms for about 2 weeks and it is amazing. And at the beginning, it smells like perfume. And then at the end of the smell, it smells more and more like a spice, like a cinnamon or like a nutmeg, right? So you have this beautiful smell. And then as spring goes on, the perfume is less and less and the spice is more and more. And I use this as an example because when we smelled it last week, we had a gathering. It was a group of people that were going to get together to talk about Noster, which is a platform very few people have used. We can talk about that later. But I was saying, hey, everybody, the reason I brought this flower in, I brought it for Jerry, I want everybody to smell it, is I record interviews for people's legacies, right? And so it's really people focusing on their past and they're doing it for their future, right? So they're talking about things that happened to them, but they're doing it as an opportunity to give it to people in the future. But there's a few moments in life where you can pause and be totally in the present. Right. And that's what smelling a flower is, or perfume, or cooking, and really your faith or your religion. And I was just excited to talk with you about this because our very first conversation got into the spiritual realm right away.
And strangely, a year ago, and I can't believe and then all this came up and we saw when it was blooming again. I love that synchronicity. Yeah, that was beautiful.
So tell me about,
what about, before we forget, because some of the other amazing things in the Wim Hof thing that we saw over time, and then the studies related to it before we forget. So some of the other, you said, why do this? So again, so if you're suffering from a various, so of course, depression, all that. So these are things that people should look at the Wim Hof method, work with their doctors, but add it. However, we saw some other things that just seemed too good to be true. And that was miraculous healing, kind of like, so somebody would break an arm and it would just fix itself faster than the doctors would expect. And you're like, okay, we hear that, and it's placebo. And placebo is a real thing. It's good. It's a good thing. But But there was one guy, for example, who he got 2nd and 3rd degree burns in a big part of his body. And he had already learned the Wim Hof method. And he just decided to do, we said, remember when you get sick, do a lot of rounds of breathing. And he just did tons every day and every day. He went to the doctors. They said, look, if you were a child, we would not need to do the skin grafts necessarily at the level that yours are at, because children have enough stem cells and they'll naturally grow back. The skin will grow back. You're going to need it. He said, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do this Wim Hof method, and please just give me a few weeks. And then, okay, fine. You can give a little time. You know, if he was going through the painful rewrapping and all this stuff, he did it. They were shocked. Now, again, just anecdotal evidence is how science starts, though. If you have a lot of people with these kind of experiences, then you can follow up with a good study, right? So we're at that stage. But one of the things that was really interesting is that the doctors go, well, we don't know why, but you are showing that regeneration like a child, which is shocking us, but let's just go with it. So let's keep doing it. And he has been wanting to tell the story, and that's great. So coincidentally, and you can look this up, Wim Hof Method and a Nobel Prize. That's one of the titles things. This Nobel Prize, total by coincidence, comes out, not a study on the Wim Hof Method, but on hypoxic conditions in the human body. Coincidentally, what do we create with the Wim Hof Method more than other techniques? Deep hypoxia. This Nobel Prize came out, and the study showed that what was really interesting about creating temporary hypoxia in the human body is that it released one of the effects, including adrenaline release and all that. One of the effects was activating stem cells. So people need to learn this, because we talk about longevity and all these longevity conferences that I'm going to and all that stuff. And here's just a technique. Why don't we start learning to use our own body to heal itself? This is a fact. Look it up. And again, is it early science? Sure. Is it potentially not true? Possible. We have to be skeptical. It's not just one or two people. It's over and over again. Why am I healing faster with this technique? Why am I not getting sick? So there's all that. Another thing, we were talking about the brain study. So Wayne University, Google this too, Wim Hof Method and Wayne University study. So we thought that, we knew adrenaline is being released. Dr. Rhonda Patrick is one of the physiologists that was involved with the Wim Hof Method in the early days. She would talk to Wim about this, and she would talk about the physiological responses, being a PhD in physiology and all. And obviously you're having adrenaline and noradrenaline, but they hadn't done an fMRI. So Wayne University does an fMRI of Wim Hof. Lo and behold, first of all, we expected to see more like brown fat activation and stuff like that. But instead what they saw was, in his brain, was endocannabinoids were being released. Now, what's an endocannabinoid? Does that ring a bell?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it turns out he ate a lot of edibles, right? No, he didn't. He didn't do any of that. So cannabinoids, of course, is marijuana. And the reason marijuana works is because it connects to the part of your brain, to those receptors in the brain that are cannabinoid receptors. We actually have that. Our brain can create itself, but it turns out there's an herb that also can hook up to it, right? The Wim Hof, when you did that breathing, part of probably a little already you're feeling is endocannabinoids connecting, and you're getting a natural high. So Wim has always been saying, get high on your own supply. He's right. Literally, he's creating his own.
Yeah, I felt like a lightness that was there that I think would be really similar to getting high.
Yeah. So, and again, I think we thought, well, that's because you're low on oxygen. I mean, there are many reasons, right? And so endocannabinoids is a reason, but there's all kinds of reasons endocannabinoids are wonderful. They also do give a sense of euphoria, of course, but they also deaden, I won't say deaden pain, but you don't feel pain as much. So it's helpful getting in the cold. But again, there's a lot of times in life when life is painful. So these breathing techniques, to have that tool available. Having said that, we talked about children. Again, one contraindication. The breathing technique is very dangerous if you're pregnant as well, because you don't want to be in a hypoxic state in your brain. But also under 16, we don't know what these hypoxic states do to a growing brain. So we limit it. I did it with my child, Cyrus, for a few years, and it really, very stressful time, the breathing technique, but with limit to 30-second retentions. So at 30 seconds, not a deep one. And explain to them also that, by the way, don't be teaching your friends this, and don't do this in the water and all that, because this is all the issues. But it's such a powerful technique. Sometimes we do want to give that technique to our children because to manage their own. Maybe some of them get panic attacks or, other things.
Yeah, I use deep breathing with Violet to calm her down when she's upset, and it totally works. But this will be a different level of things. And actually, every night she asks, "Can we do breathing exercises?" So we have this thing where we either do the relaxation of her body or we do a dream journey where I try and load up fun images. But I've never done it with anything other than I was trying to make it as close as possible to meditation without it calling it meditation.
Well, do you want to go into the dreaming part of this a bit?
I'd love to, yeah. Okay.
So now we go into the advanced topics of Wim Hof. I'd like to mention, so Wim Hof's son, Wim Hof, is the CEO of Inner Fire. They have an organization that he founded and all that, because Wim is just doing this stuff, and he's out there and he's pushing the limits all the time. And so they have the WimHofMethod.com. There's a lot of stuff on there. Really, I say this because I want people to know about these resources. They have 1,800 instructors worldwide. And 9 years ago, there was zero instructors. So it started, I kept wanting to become an instructor, and then life would happen. And that was okay, because it turns out I was just, I've been doing this breathing techniques for so many years. I ended up just helping teach unofficially them. And so we're going to talk about some of the more advanced things, because just because you become an instructor doesn't mean you've done decades of breathing and other things. But one thing that's really cool is if somebody's interested, you go to the website, you learn these things. There's a free Wim Hof mini class. You can pay a few $100 for the full thing. I recommend it highly. I think it's worth $1,000. You pay $1,000, $2,000 for these online courses. This is much cheaper. But the other thing is that they have these Wim Hof events. So these instructors have learned how to create this journey. It's 6-7 hours where you do a bunch of breathing with them. They talk about the science a bit, but they go into great detail compared to, I did one of them only here in St. Louis, in fact, and it was unbelievable. And people, it just transformed their lives, one-on-one learning from an instructor. And what I think is so cool what they did, and it really excites me, as you can see, is that it's the same experience worldwide. They did create a standard for that. So when it's a Wim Hof instructor, if you go into Singapore or you come here or Europe, it's the same experience and you're learning the same technique, right?
So if you come for big experience, are you preparing for it like a marathon or something? Are you going to be just exhausted at the end of the day, just that you've given all your effort? And
no, people are like, this was awesome. And they end the same day in an ice bath. So instead of 10 weeks, you just go there and, I'm going to terrify it, but people are like, I don't know, they prepped you so much and they throw you in an ice bath. It's not a 32 degree one probably. I think, I don't know but 50 something degrees, it's still plenty cold. It may be colder. And then, but you've done that 10-week journey in 6 hours. And the breathing technique they do enough of it that you're getting a deeper experience. So one of the things you can do, I mentioned holotropic breathing, which has been around for decades and has some good science. And one of the leaders in that is my mentor, Jim Ironman, Dr. James Ironman, transpersonal psychiatrist. Lucky. The Wim Hof group was talking about him at the beginning, and here he's been my mentor anyway. So in the Wim Hof method, if you want to go deeper and you want to, let's say, you have this need, or somebody who's into psychedelics or whatever, why? You don't have to do them. Do a 45-minute session of Wim Hof method. You can do holotropic breathing, but the Wim Hof method, you can do 6 rounds or about 4. Keep breathing, and you will trip. Do it. You'll just start tripping. But there's a problem. The challenge, let's call it a challenge. holotropic breathing only is done one-on-one with somebody who's trained, that if there's trauma, it's very common to start crying and, all this intensity coming out the first time. I could breathe all day long and nothing changes. It's very interesting over the years, I'll do it with people, I almost miss those days, but you're just mellow. So, but you will trip, and I tripped on holotropic breathing and the Wim Hof method. Still, by the end of a 45-minute session, you are feeling like you're in a new world. You don't feel like you need psychedelics. So that's a popular topic right now. And psychedelics themselves have some great benefits, right? They're rewiring the brain. There's some neurogenesis. So again, we'll see what, this future studies on why this is important. I think another interesting thing that's so cool about this is that I told you that even people who were into yoga were kind of like, skeptical. In the traditional yoga format, if you go in, the instructors will say, hey, and this, you might be like 4 box breathing and all these different techniques to relax.
I don't know anything about this.
Oh, okay. So the box breathing is like breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, exhale. So that's box breathing, made popular by certain type of military guys who learn this in the military. It automatically calms you down. There are other techniques, the belly breathing, fire breathing. So in Ascension Yoga and in other traditions, if you want to relax, you do a certain type of technique and it automatically relaxes. Deep breathing. You want your child to relax too. The last thing you want to do is tell them to hyperventilate. No, really. It's like, you guys are insane. 9 years ago, you were wrong. And I'm like, I get it. But when I'm learning something new, I put aside my old beliefs. I even put aside I had to, because this was mind blowing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to believe in this guy. And I think it takes like 7 years. I always do 7 years. Like, let's just go for it. And so here we are, we're doing this, breathing, but it turns out the reason it does relax you, you're hyperventilating though, but at the end you're learning, you're creating a new normal for relaxation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Whereas these other yoga techniques and all that, that's true, but you haven't changed your physiology as much. You do Wim Hof breathing for 10 weeks, the 10-week course, or you then do year after year, your new normal is different. You're just more relaxed more easily during the day. You're more focused. Like the intermittent fasting thing, just add that then with the Wim Hof method, all that.
So we started with the concept of dreams, and then we jumped into...
I brought that up because I had to, because you'll see it's a prerequisite to discuss now dreams.
Okay.
All right, so one of the things is really interesting. So if you do the breathing every day, you start realize it's interesting. It's a very common experience that I noticed that I would just stop breathing during the day because you're used to breathing deeply. Now you start automatically doing more belly breathing and everything. But I would just find myself pausing breathing and not breathing. So during the day, how does this all connect to breath? Dreaming, you wonder. Well, turns out I did not know this until it happened to me, but one of the common experiences also is in my dreams, I suddenly was dreaming, and you dream, and it's very common to start doing the Wim Hof breathing in a dream. So you're dreaming about doing that because it's your life. You're doing so much of it. And somehow a lot of us just suddenly have a coincident dream after the weeks or months, and you're doing the breathing. Turns out if you dream about breathing, you actually do the breathing. There is no separation. Ever. As far as I know, there's never a separation. So that's kind of cool because everything else in dreaming, I think some eye movement might be linked to it too. They know that, right? In REM. Could be some other things, but breathing is one of the cool things. So you sit there doing the breathing and then you do the retention, and guess what happens to the retention and all that? Massive adrenaline. You wake up, you just like, oh my God, I was just dreaming about, and then you were doing the breathing. All right. So that's kind of cool. It's just kind of cool. So what I found out though was that there's Yoga Vasishta, there's a lot of spiritual treatises that mention breathwork and retentions. It's not like Wim Hof invented the concept of holding breath and retentions, and that there is magic at the end, like at the beginning and ending of a breath. So in other words, when we do And if you stop at the full, and then when you stop at the end, there's a different, actually, one, when you fill up, your heart rate goes up, by the way. That's a fact, physiological fact. This increases heart rate. Letting go, automatically your heart rate goes down. So cardiologists will explain how and why and all that, but that's automatically what happens. So now I found out that, well, that I was becoming more and more lucid. Now, I had done brief things of lucid dreaming in my life, but then we go away. But life got more intense, as you know. Bad things happen, get even more focused. And suddenly, with the cold exposure and everything, boom, I'm becoming lucid every night. Just every night, more and more lucid.
And when you say more and more lucid, what does that mean?
So that means, that's a good question. So staying, so and it's connected to the breathing. So I found out that even as I'm more just aware of the breath, kind of like that mindfulness thing we all talk about, but you're just kind of witnessing and mindful. So Wim likes to say, by the way, just watch. So one of the techniques is, while you're doing all this stuff, just watch, just be aware, witness, just, so one technique. But then as you're going to sleep, you notice that you're just watching, you're falling asleep and you're kind of still aware, and because of the breathing even. But something in the middle of the night or whatever, you suddenly, breathing or something, and I become aware, fully aware and lucid. A lot of people have periods of lucidity. But
meaning that you are conscious that you are dreaming, meaning that you like understand, can you then control yourself in that dream?
Right. So that's the difference. And then full lucid dream, there's different layers. Sometimes you're just kind of aware, but here I am fully lucid. It's so cool. Like, it's as real as this. It's super real, right?
This happened to me when I quit drinking coffee. When I quit drinking coffee for blocks of time, I was able to do lucid dreaming on a much, much deeper level.
That's interesting that it was coffee. Stopping the coffee. Interesting. I think there's different stressors, or, we call it hormetic stress, by these good stressors that are temporary and then build you up. So, so when you had that, so, there's different levels, but the difference is, that's true. When you're lucid dreaming, like if you try to read something, it's gobbledygook. There's certain things that the dream can't do proper. What I found interesting, though, was that I immediately always want to, and it's from all the meditation, certainly, but I always just wanted to, I always fly anyway. So I would want to fly or do certain things, but I found myself then suddenly just wanting to meditate. So if you're lucid dreaming, why not meditate? And I would recommend that. So then you do your meditation. And meditation while you're lucid dreaming is mind-blowing, because you're so close to deep sleep. You're so close to that part that we never usually remember. But again, all these spiritual treatises talk about true reality, that ground state, unified field, or whatever they want to talk about, is actually the experience of deep sleep, but we never remember it.
What do you think dreams are really all about?
Well, that's kind of a whole other topic, but it depends on the traditions. But I mean, and Tibetans have a whole book on dreaming that I actually just discovered. I didn't started reading. I thought, they're making it really complicated. But some say that we dream, it's karma coming up and all this stuff. The Sufis have different terminology, nafs and all that. But one, you could say it's just stress, and which kind of agrees with the neurophysiology of the day and all that, but a lot of it's archetypical, Jungian. So, messages from the soul. That's a whole beautiful discussion we could have for hours. So sometimes, by the way, when I go lucid, I choose. Actually, more recently, I just don't even bother doing anything. I just watch what's happening, and it's fun. And then when you're lucid, by the way, things happen. I've noticed certain shadow elements, like we talk about Jung maybe now, and there's something that seems scary. I go and hug everything. That's what I do. I've done that for years. It's been about 2 years.
As a conscious thing, you choose?
Totally, yeah, because I'm lucid. Because, oh, that's scary. Oh, let me go. And I hug it. And absolutely a great technique.
Wow.
Absolutely go hug everything. So find anything and hug it.
My daughter describes being chased and being eaten in her dreams, right? And like, this is a 2-year-old and she doesn't wake up scared, but you ask her, what did you dream about? Oh, the bear chased me. And then what did it do when it caught you? It ate me. And you're like, where did you come up with this? But I had never thought, I had thought about trying to teach her to fight back, but to hug the bear or to play with the bear would be a very different thing.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Probably came out a lot from my Tonglen as well, which is bringing in all the negativity and then bringing out love. But it's all about love. I know right? It's so cliche. It's all about love, but then it's like, then you bring it up. It's like, well, I guess that's obvious. Yeah, actually, it's super powerful.
What is love then, if it's such a powerful, important thing?
What is love? And you just bring up concepts like, let's. I mean, it depends on the individual.
This conversation's been funny because you have a track, right? So you are focused on a single subject, and for me, I'm like grabbing like parts all over. So it's just a different.
And I'm the one with ADD, right? But
I definitely have it. There's no
I know.
question.
Well, and again, I'm good about, yes, I even prepared so that I would try to keep it all interrelated. I'm trying to, it's all related to the Wim Hof method still a little because it's what the topic for today is. But again, this dreaming, so breath work, right? So now, even in the breathing, it's, but by the way, Wim Hof says his technique is about love. So I know we are talking about breath and all that, and yet his whole conversation is, by the way, my technique is really about love. Why? Because now, here we are, breath helps us become conscious during a dream. The breath work we're doing increases vagal tone. It truly makes you way more loving. Your children, yourself, you just feel more in touch and connected, and so you're in love, and you're able to love more. And so he's like, it's really about love, but he can't write about just love. No one will, it's like another writing about love, but it's practical things. So again, getting back to the dream. So yeah, hugging helps. And then when you're doing your meditation, what you'd be surprised is that, so it's, first of all, it says, I'm biphasic in my sleep now. Now, I'm not saying everyone will do this, but it turns out the Wim Hof method caused this partly. Put my child to bed at 9 o'clock, because that's when he went to go to bed. And I would help put him to sleep, and then I'd be up by 2. And then I would do the Wim Hof stuff on the site to moderate it, because I'm kind of a busy guy, for like 3-4 hours every night from 2 to 4, and then I'd go back to sleep. So I end up becoming biphasic because of it. And it was a spiritual practice, because trust me, there's nothing like being flamed by people on social media mad at you every day, calling you a jerk and all that. Because I'm moderator. I'm not popular. I'm not a popular guy. I have to tell people to stop talking about this and vaccines and politics. And, it's like there's rules. We have strict rules. To this day, there are certain people who think I'm just this egomaniac that tries to control people. Oh, and I feel it. I get it. That's going to be a persona. Fine, go away. So anyway, but it was an act of, so I had to literally give compassion to all those people. And that's why there's a whole group was like, this guy is so compassionate. I'm like, well, actually, the Wim Hof method, that became part of my method, was just, okay, you're coming into this group. Some people are in pain. They're depressed. They hate you. You're just, lashing out. Okay, now let's go back to the dreams. So the dreams are suddenly, that helped me, I think, because now suddenly, going back to sleep, I think the biphasic nature of even waking up in the middle of the night, maybe part of it also helped become more aware, even waking up naturally in the dream. So you do your spiritual practice. And what is love? Well, love is actually, I would define it ultimately as the silence between your thoughts. So, we're thinking like all this is blah, blah, blah. But the real me and the real you, right, is the silence between the thoughts. And as we meditate and we do all these different techniques, and we breathe, particularly at the end and at the beginning, we just breathe. Suddenly there can be a little gap more, and that's the real us. And that's silence, and that becomes love. And it even has a smell. And it has a taste, and but it's that. And so love is totally freeing. So love is freedom. Love is light, love is all those Rumi, and that's the connection here is, so, in Sufism. So I brought this because this was a gift for Wim Hof. And this is one of 200 copies only. But this actually is an exact replica because there's writing on the sides of everything of a lot of the famous poetry. Rumi himself had other people writing it down. And so there's only 200 exact copies made of this in Turkey. And one of the Sufi masters that Dr. Nevid Ergin, he is the one who had the permission to actually create 200 copies of this. And so everyone talks about, see, there's like some writing on this one, there's some writing on the side here. And yes, it's in Farsi mostly, some in Greek and some other things.
So you can read this?
No, I can't. People who read Farsi, I don't read Farsi, even though I actually have a Persian background. It's like Old English. It's like Old Farsi. So they say, oh, I understand the words, but it's kind of weird. Nevid Ergin was not known as a Sufi master. He was known as a translator. So they gave him access to this because they knew he was a great translator. And Coleman Barks, who's very famous, also was a friend of Dr. Nevid Ergin's and would use his translations and further translated. And a lot of the Rumi poetry you'll see and read is written by Coleman Barks, and the connection is Dr. Nevid Ergin, who was actually a Sufi master.
And so talk about Rumi. Who was he?
So approximately 800 years ago, Rumi was, it became known now as a great mystic, but a summary is he was just a standard teacher of Islamic studies and things like that back then. And then he was wandering and, there's multiple stories, but suddenly he was wandering around in a town and he came face to face with Shams, which became his master. And again, there's multiple stories of this, but he had essentially spiritual awakening, like Shams, again, different stories, said something that just made him realize everything he learned, all the words and his religion, those were words, that was full love. And so that just blew him away. And then so he studied under this master Shams. Again, I'm summarizing because there's multiple stories of this, but Shams, the students of Rumi became jealous and murdered Shams, murdered him. And the grief that Rumi went through of losing his master is what all the poetry is about. He wrote the poetry without practice. It just literally flowed, done. That's crazy. He was I don't know if today he is, but for many years, he was the #1 poet in the United States. That's great when you think about it. There's this, So, and so he's considered non-dual. He's loved because, yes, it was Islamic, but he transcended that and brought all religions. And, he thought, love is in all religions. And so he's also the founder of the whirling dervish orders and several orders of Sufism. And so that's where these Sufis would get together and then whirl. I learned how to whirl and all that. I joined those different groups. And so you learn these different breathing techniques to transcend, to have these experiences. So it's about actual transformation. So Rumi, and just like in Buddhism and all that, it's not a belief system only. It's you have to transform your physiology.
What is the whirling all about in the Sufism?
So whirling is called zikr. Remember, it's a type of zikr to remember God. And mindfulness would be another zikr term you could use, which is their terminology. And however, it's a technique where you learn how to, a little like the Wim Hof Method, it's a state of mind, and you're doing different prayers and breathing techniques before you start it, but then you learn how to do the whirling, the spinning, and you are essentially going into that space of silence. When you're whirling, you don't feel like you're moving. It's a really wild experience. So while you're like, my God, these people must be getting dizzy, I'm like, you're whirling and you don't feel like you're moving. I mean, your body feels like you're moving, but you're centered. You're in the center. You're in the ketub, as we like to say. So you're in that silence between the words. So you're now in that silence.
Jerry, of all the people I've ever met, I've met some people that are philosophical and religious. I've never met anyone that has pursued it in this way. Where has the pursuit come for you?
Well, I think there's pretty amazing people that I could introduce you to that have done this. But life. I was born in Germany, and then my mom came here to St. Louis when I was age 1, and that's interesting. So Wim Hof was spiritual when he was younger. This is part of the interesting connection, is that I was the same way. At age 5, I was already questioning reality. I was an atheist at age 5. I remember telling my mom, "There's no way God exists. If God existed, he would come here and fix everything." Pretty deep for a 5-year-old to argue. But and then at 16, I learned TM and Vedanta through Jim Ironman and went through Jungian analysis. So I would say that really changed me. I became deeply depressed, and at the world, you can imagine being kind of aware at a young age, and then things just didn't fit, right? But suddenly everything did when I met Jim Ironman. And so then going through Jungian analysis and dream analysis over years really changed me. And then to find out when I was 27 that I'm French and German, but biologically half Persian. And then found my Persian father. And later, when I married Layla 20 years ago, I was into, at that point I was already into Buddhism, Tantra, and done TM and all these things. I had not done Sufism. I was just a fan of reading Rumi. However, marrying into a Persian family, they love Rumi and they love Hafiz. And so I thought, wow, well, I get that. So I just took it up. I looked around and joined a few groups and did some research. And next thing I know, in fact, I did get married here, but I got married in Iran. And I went to Hafez's tomb, which is still one of the coolest things I've ever done. And then here, and met others that did the whirling officially. And there's 7 years of study. Funny enough, it's 7 years of study to become a whirling dervish. And that's just a term, but it's a process. So it's a physiology. Being a student of Sufism is changing your physiology. It's changing your mind. It's changing how you experience reality. But it's very similar to Buddhism and all these other. You'll see most people who are practicing Sufism in the United States also practicing Buddhism. Many of them are Christian. We have people who are involved that love Jesus, and they're obviously an open-minded type of person who loves Jesus because they're also involved in that. But you do not have to be Muslim to participate.
I think of all the people that start things like meditation or journaling, and they do it for a little while and then it's just too hard to keep it up. And you seem to be the opposite of this, right? You seem to be the type of person that is taking on a breathing method and a way of studying the Sufism. It just strikes me as something that makes you unique in that way, that you're pursuing it not just for a little while. You didn't just dabble. You became the moderator of the Wim Hof. You didn't just dabble. You did the 7 years of study to be a part of Sufism. So you either, well, I don't want to put it into a dichotomy. Some of the ideas that I think must drive you is either a pursuit of some kind of truth, or the search for something, or I don't know. But I'm very curious because this is a very rare trait.
Well, that means a ton coming from you. I mean, again, a lot. My life has been magical, and tragic, and magical, and all the things that life is. But again, even at a young age, there was a sense of destiny, right? And the sense of destiny continues. That, for example, we can get into that. But my feeling was that even everything I learned, that it was important to, well, that sense of silence and everything was real to me even at age 16. Some of my deepest spiritual experiences, quote, were probably at age 17. I mean, unbounded, light in the middle, during deep sleep, stuff like that. So I wouldn't, I'm not enlightened now. I think I was probably more enlightened at age 17 than I am now. Not a guru. I'm not. Having said that, I'm talking to you and I want to get more involved because there's so much, I think, misinformation on the internet now by people who know a lot less than I and others like me who have been doing this a lot. So we have to start engaging and sharing some of this knowledge, which leads to, so because this is all into what is love? What is consciousness? Right? This is super important because to me, my destiny, I felt, was that somehow I felt that I would be involved in the discussion of the dawn of AI. I swear it's the weirdest thing. And here I am, 57 years old, and I just had a huge $75 million AI exit, 2 months ago. I didn't get most of the money, I like to say that, but it's still a major, huge exit to a very popular, powerful company called Snowflake. Founded the company in the 90s, for goodness sake. So I'm one of the founders of a very powerful AI company. And I understand the discussion of AI, and the relevance here is all that. Okay, so we're learning the Wim Hof Method, there's Sufism, all these things. That helps us define what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? What does love mean? What is consciousness? All these things now link to, coincidentally, I've been involved in AI for decades. Now, what does it mean that ChatGPT and all these different things are seeming to maybe become self-aware later? General intelligence. And the discussions are very deep because I practice my discussions on Facebook. It's fascinating because you can get into arguments there and have a facade. Some of the spiritual people are the most dangerous to me because some of them are like, oh, well, there we go. The AI is just a part of the universe. And so it also is now sentient and it's equal to humans. And that's not my position, for example. So we are unique. Our genome is unique. That the DNA that we don't understand how it works yet, is very sacred and very unique. That our ability to wake up, you're waking up in your dream. The next step is wake up even in deep sleep. When you wake up to being awake. So I know that you know a bit about Plato, right? And all that, of course. So what we want to know is we're living in the shadows and we want to know what that real light is. And that's what we're talking about ultimately. And no matter how intelligent the AI seems to be, it's just shadow. It can pretend. I have intentions now in the next year to create versions of the AI. I'm mentoring a company doing it right now to be the Buddha, to be whatever you want it to be, these famous beings, and talk about the scriptures. And we're already seeing some of that. Somebody just posted on Facebook, all this amazing people are like, oh my God, like, all this Buddhist thought and these treatises, and like the ChatGPT can do that and all this stuff. It's not enlightened. It's just regurgitating text.
This is interesting because I was talking with somebody at the Noster event, and we were having a conversation about AI, and I pointed out, well, it is going to have a pretty big impact on people because I have said, GPT chat, you are an expert in Jungian psychology. Right. I'm going to describe for you in as high fidelity as I can my dream, right? And I want you to give me feedback on it. What it gave me back was more insightful than any person I know that I could go to ask. So there's a feeling that this thing is sentient, or that there's definitely a feeling of power in it, right? Where it's like, you are telling me things about my dream using all of the writings that I could have access to Carl Jung, like, feels pretty something to me. It feels like a spark.
Oh, I know, right. It does. Absolutely. Imagine now you're whatever spiritual religion and you're used to hearing about whatever, some Buddhist deep thinking and, some of the stuff we're even talking about. And then these truths are suddenly coming out of ChatGPT. Exactly. Like the Jungian, but yeah. So, By the way, so, I mentor one-on-one, as you know, certain people. And so when I do that, if their wish, then I'll work with the dreams with them because that really helps. And there's a different relationship when you talk to somebody, well, particularly with a Sufi background. We have our own way of looking at dreams. But if you have the background of archetypes and all that, trust me, it's very different than the ChatGPT. The ChatGPT is, the reason it just seems so amazing is because Jung was right. I mean, there are archetypes and there are universal symbols, and you're a human, and we are actually all going through very similar paths, many different ways. I mean, ultimately, my personal experience is that, look, what we really are is one consciousness that's a gem with many facets, and each one of us is just looking through one of those other facets of this one I think that's actually a very Buddhist thought somewhere, probably. But, I don't know if you've heard that before.
No,
but,
it's new to me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, so, we are that silence, that infinite golden silence or translucence. But then you and I are just two facets of that same universal Buddha or whatever, or non-dual Christians believe Jesus or whatever. It's that non-dual being is seeing through all of us simultaneously. And we can identify with that. So the Wim Hof technique and these breathing techniques and all these things can actually get us to that state of, remember I said psychedelic? I mean, it's crazy. And so, you can have that really deep experience. So that's different than, I know, we live in a dangerous time. It's laughable, but somebody was arguing like, well, there's people who are into sex dolls, so I guess
Oh, there's no question to me.
think
that
about
people
you're
will
gonna
date
start getting into.
Oh,
but
no
people
question.
are going to fall in love with the computer,
more deeply than they've ever been in love with a human being by far.
and that is good and bad. I mean, I have to admit, like I'm very much involved with Dr. John Morley here in St. Louis on loneliness. He's a gerontologist, so we deal with. I invest in a company that helps with loneliness, Alzheimer's and all this stuff as you're getting older. And loneliness is a big issue. So you can imagine, I think there's a space for this, that you're going to have a robot essentially that looks very human or can talk and have amazingly deep discussions that removes that loneliness. The danger is we need to understand the difference between being fully awake and human and not because you there's a slippery slope here. You're already seeing it. Well, let's just upload ourselves into a computer. Why they're no different, or maybe there's a false equivalence. We are capable of so much more. We are capable of what Plato says, which is wake up from the shadows. We have to wake up. That the AI is shadow. Now I don't know. That's a whole other discussion because it's in sci-fi, and I think sci-fi sometimes can be real, and if it predicts the future in amazing ways, is maybe there's someday a quantum mechanical computer that's truly aware from the level of the universe or something. But even Neil deGrasse Tyson, I love him because he's not even trying to be spiritual. He just says it's true. It's a fact. We are the universe conscious watching itself, right? We don't need to. That's a fact. Look how magical that is.
What do you think happens in a world where you can't distinguish between the person that is awake because of their DNA and the robot that is pretending to be awake through, or I don't know, pretending, it's just behaving the way that it was designed?
Well, it's really easy. So ultimately, a robot has no awareness in deep sleep. That would be one way. And, human beings do. So the witness is what makes us human, that 24-hour awareness. It is important now that more than ever that the Elon Musks, that all these guys that are involved in this, that they personally experience that themselves, at a full extent. It's more important than ever. So that, that Sam, it's intriguing, isn't it, that how many of these people are connected to St. Louis, by the way? It's a wonderful place to be.
It's the center of the universe in a lot of ways.
It's really weird. It's very interesting, but yeah.
Jerry, that experience of silence we just had, I want to talk about that. Like that in and of itself was rather surreal. I've never had anyone just stop talking. And there was an aliveness in that space that I hope if you were listening to it as a listener, that you also experienced that aliveness in the silence, so that space between the thoughts.
Right.
Fuck, Jerry, that's pretty good.
Well, thank you. So I'm an energetic persona and all that, but the silence is the real me and the real you and everything that binds us. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And in our culture, I think in the United States particularly, we're known to like just be go, go, go. But it's interesting, Norwegians and others, I think the term, it's not loom, but there's this thing where they just like to sit down and just be quiet together and, at least. And that's not the same depth, right? You don't have to go deep here. But I wanted to give you the real answer is in the silence, that it's there's so many books written on this. Rumi said, the most, I'm paraphrasing. I don't memorize Rumi, by the way. I used to, and then I just gave up because it's silly. I mean, he himself said the lowest form of spirituality is poetry. And then he put out all this poetry, but because it's just pointing to something that he really wanted to be. But ultimately, you felt connection. The silence brings us connection.
Well, and at first it was frightening.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting.
It's like, and I was able to experience it, and it actually was like a cold water bath where I was just like, okay, now relax, relax. And, but the silence is frightening, like, because in some important way, you feel like doing something is being alive and doing nothing is wasteful. Is maybe the way I would put it.
That's interesting. So when we're dreaming, and all these things, that silence is more easily accessible, and that's why, like, it just there, it drops into this infinite silence. You're like, oh, that's what they're talking about, and then you read it, and then you read these spiritual texts, and you're like, oh. It's in the Bible too, the Bible, talks about it. It's just everywhere. It's everywhere in all these texts. It's just misinterpreted, of course.
Yeah, nobody is selling silence right now, right? Like there's the reason we aren't exposed to it is because of all the things that we encounter. There's very little.
Well, no, I mean, one of them. No, come on. He's beloved by. I'm a huge fan. I'm just blanking here. Eckhart Tolle.
Oh yeah,
that's all he's about, actually. So he didn't really have much of a technique. He accidentally kind of got enlightened. That happens too. Like no techniques, poof, through pain. He'll talk about that. It's just pain. He was in such massive pain, he just released, and then now he.
I hear him speak, and this is funny because you and I have a couple of people that you are acquainted with that I think like that's gobbledygook nonsense.
Oh, and he's one of them.
He sounds like a crazy person.
Right. I know. Again, Layla, my wife, I said, he makes absolutely no sense.
Yes.
Right. That's right. Because speaking from that level makes absolutely no sense. And that's right. Yeah, it doesn't.
Then how would you know if it's worth listening to?
Well, it's fair. But first of all, it's interesting. Why I point people to people like Jim Ironman, transpersonal psychiatrists and all that. It's an interesting whole other discussion, but imagine that there's a fine, let's just put it this way. We're talking about AI, but in mental health, there's a fine line between psychosis, craziness, and being one with the universe and being God, so to speak, or whatever.
Oh yeah, genius and madness are like
it's so
right
similar.
next to each other.
And what was so useful being married to a psychiatrist sometimes, particularly all these different techniques, was like, I'm having these, it's funny you mentioned that, because the feeling of fear that precedes wakefulness is very real, because your ego is shattered. You're like, oh, come on. Like I'm insane. First of all, you feel like you're going insane possibly. So it's really nice to have the formal, in our society, the formal definition of sanity is a psychiatrist. So I'd literally look over and go, am I acting completely mad? I mean, there's so manic people are like, I'm Jesus, I am God, right? So I love Jim Ironman's terminology. He says, well, so one little secret is like, it's like, when somebody is manic or in a psychotic state, there's some truth to it. But what happens is they'll be like, I'm Jesus and I'm great, but you're not. When you're having that silence, that connection with like this feeling of everything, and it just is massive, but it's everywhere. You are too, and this is, and the trees are. And so it goes beyond ego. So that's the one interesting thing is it transcends ego. So these experiences go beyond you and me.
I think maybe that's, when people describe when you have children, you're changed.
Yes. That's a beautiful example.
There's something about like when you have a child, you aren't like, oh, I'm going to hoard this thing. You're like, everything is wonderful. Like the boundless, like, look at this joy that I have and this connection with the oneness. And then all of a sudden you're brought back to earth about the responsibilities that you have. That's but right. Like, I think there's some level of ego death, maybe is a good way to describe it, when you have a child, that if you don't have a child, there's other ways to have that of ego death, but that one's pretty jarring, right? That one throws you into a level of awakeness that you were not prepared for.
That's right. Exhausting, forcing you to, that's right. Thinking of outside of yourself about this other being.
Yeah, that's right. And no turning back, right? There's like, now, even if something were to happen and you were no longer, caring for a living child anymore, you would still be a parent. You would still have had that experience. So it's a little bit like, leaving the Garden of Eden, right? They put the angels with the flaming swords outside of it. You don't get to go back in.
Right.
Well, Jerry, this has been wild. I always knew that it would be, but I had no idea what it would actually be like. So I am so glad you came on here. We only opened up the thread of 1,000 different things. If people wanted to know more about things that matter to you or contact you in some way, what is the best way for people to find you?
Well, right now, it's almost unfortunate. Facebook is my main connection with the world. It's a mess, Facebook, I think, but at the same time, I'm at G Caussade, so it's facebook.com/G Caussade. And
Noster, people can find you.
I was going to say, and then we could connect to Noster, but I don't even know my. Well, I know you can look me up on G Caussade, and I'm Gerald Caussade, so we can post that thing. But yeah, on Noster, of course, and we could end it with that. But I am very excited. These new technologies also help practical things in life. I mean, look, we're talking about all that stuff, but there's always an interesting equivalence that happens in the world too. So these big, we just talked about the limitations of social media now, the way they are, these decentralized systems like Nostr and all that, I think are the future. That brings about its own challenges and own issues. But I'm very excited about, how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that it already brought together people in the real world in a way that I would never get together with a bunch of people I met on Facebook. Like, we had some people that were all on Nostr. We found out they were in St. Louis. We said, hey, come here and meet with us. And we got to meet interesting people. And
actually, again, some of the most interesting people. Yeah, amazing people.
Well, I will have you back on and we'll talk all about Nostr and AI and how that all goes. Thank you so much for coming on, Jerry.
All right, thanks.